Hey everyone, I'm glad you're here. It's good to see y'all. Please feel free to stand with me and sing. If you need lyrics, they are in the back over there. All this pain, I wonder if I'll ever find my way. I wonder if my life could really change at all. All this earth, could all that is lost ever be found? Could a garden come up from this ground at all? You make beautiful things. You make beautiful things out of the dust. You make beautiful things. You make beautiful things out of us. All around, hope is springing up from this old ground. Out of chaos, life is being found in you. You make beautiful things. You make beautiful things out of the dust. You make beautiful things. You make beautiful things out of us. You make beautiful things. You make beautiful things out of the dust. You make beautiful things. You make beautiful things out of us. You make me new. You are making me new. You make me new. You are making me new. You make beautiful things. You make beautiful things out of the dust. You make beautiful things. You make beautiful things out of us. You make beautiful things. You make beautiful things out of the dust. You make beautiful things. You make beautiful things out of us. Tis so sweet to trust in Jesus, just to take him at his word, just to rest upon his promise, and to know thus saith the Lord. Oh, how sweet to trust in Jesus, just to trust unfailing love, just in simple faith to plunge me 'neath the healing, cleansing flood. Jesus, Jesus, how Jesus, Jesus, precious Jesus, oh, for grace to trust Him more. Yes, 'tis sweet to trust in Jesus, just from harm and striving cease, just from Jesus simply taking life and rest and joy and peace. Jesus, Jesus, how I trust Him, how I've proved Him o'er and o'er. Jesus, Jesus, precious Jesus, oh, for grace to trust Him more. I'm so glad I learned to trust Thee, precious Jesus, Savior, friend. And I know that Thou art with me, will be with me to the end. Jesus, Jesus, how I trust Him, how I've proved Him o'er and o'er. Jesus, Jesus, precious Jesus, oh, for grace to trust Him more. Jesus, Jesus, how I trust Him, how I've proved Him o'er and o'er. Jesus, Jesus, precious Jesus, oh, for grace to trust Him more. Kindness is leading me away from the same beaten road I always take. You've always shown me when to change my mind. Kindness is showing me to love with no more fear, but all of the fullness in your heart for everyone. You're leading me to disown every stone of judgment I have thrown. Over and over and over again, you challenge the thoughts that are inside my head, a gentle push when I am stuck in my way. Over and over and over again, you challenge the thoughts that are inside my head, a gentle push when I am stuck in my way. You're leading me to disown every stone of judgment I have thrown. Lord, we thank you for the kindness that we have experienced from you here together with these people, with the other beloved people in our lives. I pray that as we listen to the message this morning that Cole is bringing, that our hearts will be open to compassion, to kindness for ourselves as well as others. In Jesus' name, amen.
Good morning. We don't really have a lot of announcements. It'll just be the same announcement until the end of July, which is that we have unfortunately come to the decision that we need to close the church. So our last service will be Sunday, July 31st. Today we have Cole, and then the last 3 Sundays will be Chris Gibson. And if you are in the building in proximity to coming with us, we're going to be planning a goodbye lunch at the end of that very final service. So immediately following service on July 31st, which is a Sunday, we're going to go do a church goodbye lunch. Location TBD. And so now we are hearing from Cole.
Hi.
Well, Modlin.
Yeah.
Those of you that don't know.
Yeah. All right. Well, yeah, it's good to share with you guys. I wanted to talk a little bit about shame and compassion, healing from the shame in our lives. I think it's a really important topic. I was trying to think of different things that I could talk about. I know with this community ending, that a lot of us are going through grief, and as a therapist, that was kind of my first, reaction was maybe we should talk about grief. But then I was thinking about, some of the different experiences that we have maybe going forward and looking for community, in the next phase in all of our lives. And I think understanding shame, kind of where shame comes from, and learning also what we can take from our experience at Collective, what we have maybe learned and grown in different ways, that would be a powerful thing for us to think about. So you might remember Emily and I talked a few months ago about community and belonging, and learning how to maybe find belonging in something bigger than yourself and how powerful that is. We also talked about how we have an opportunity in communities to learn how to accept ourselves and how to grow, and that in that place, in a place like Collective, or Collective specifically, that a lot of us have been given the opportunity to thrive in amazing ways because we see this acceptance and we share this compassion for one another. So as though this has given us that opportunity, I think about it being a place of good soil, to use kind of Christian analogies there. I was thinking, Holly last week passed out snacks. Like, I should have brought, the VBS, like the cup of like Oreo soil, like Oreo cookies with like gummy worms. If I had been prepared, I would have brought that. Rob and the direction that they went with Collective, Caroline and Rob really were able to create a place of good soil for people to learn to be compassionate, and that's continued. But as we go from here, what can we take with us? Our little cup of soil with us, right? So to start, I think it's important to look a little more at shame, what we came from maybe, other places that we had been, or even just in our own lives, where we've picked up shame and understood shame to affect us, because it's pervasive. It's not just from a specific place that might have happened. We want to learn, what is kind of the mechanism of shame, how does it work, and then how do we heal from that, and how do we take what we have fostered here in this community with us in some positive way. So shame is just defined in kind of what I've found a helpful definition of shame is that it's a painful belief in one's defectiveness as a human being. It's more than just a feeling. It's also kind of your bodily or physical responses combined with predictable actions or behaviors, distressing thoughts, and a deep despair. So at its root, shame is the belief in your defectiveness as a human, almost that you are subhuman, right? So how does shame come about? So intuitively, we can kind of understand that shame seems to probably happen early, maybe early experiences of feeling that you're not enough, that you're not good enough, or that you don't measure up in some way. And the research actually bears this out. Psychologically, we can trace it back often to very early childhood experiences, often from primary caregivers, but not always. It can come from other places, of course, as well. But it can be direct or indirect. We can learn shame from other people and how they treat themselves. That's really important, not just how they treat you. A lot of parents maybe have a really positive way of interacting with their own kids, but then they treat themselves with a lot of hate and self-loathing, and that kind of shame that they put on themselves is often picked up by the kids as, maybe maybe they're not as good, or maybe I'm not as good. Maybe they have such a negative opinion of themselves, and always wanting to. One example would be being a parent who's always dieting or always talking about how awful they look. Maybe they wouldn't share any of that with their own kid or put that on their kid, but just the way they're treating themselves is sharing a shame message, right? So the first shame message that I think is important, so I break it down and often talk through this in therapy with clients, but there are 5 basic messages that I found really common as a kind of a originating point for shame for children. So the first one might be, you are not good. So the force behind this message is that at your very core, there's something rotten or evil about you. And obviously, this has huge implications. It's also, unfortunately, the position that a lot of people take from a religious perspective. We have original sin and the whole doctrine there, and I'm not going to get too deep into that, but I will say that there are responses to that. I know Matthew Fox has a good book, Original Blessing. There's also another one I haven't read that came out more recently. I don't know if either of you have read it, Danielle Schroyer. Yeah. I don't know if she is kind of building on Fox's book or if it's...
I don't know. She came and preached here several years ago on that right after that book came out.
Yeah.
And she did all of her her graduate studies on the idea of original blessing.
Yeah. So definitely something to look up if you're wanting another perspective on the fall and original sin, kind of our status. In a nutshell, at least the Matthew Fox book, the direction that goes is to look at God in all things and present and through all things, and that we should be looking at the goodness of God in all. And sin is present still, evil is still real and exists, but it's considered more of an exception. Instead of the starting point being we're all sinful, we're all evil and bad as the rule, and then God's grace as kind of the exception. The starting point is we're all good and worthy as creations of God, and with God abiding in us. And the exception is that there's sin and evil in the world, and that we can also do. So that's important, though, that if we come from this position, even as children, of growing up thinking, I'm rotten, I'm evil, of course shame can come from that. I've got to, change this. I have to do more. I have to do something to get over this. I think, I could say a lot more about this, and if I were to say more about it, I think the direction that the Western or American Christian church has gone in a lot of ways, I think has been an inordinate attention to punishment and kind of our natural sinful state. And I think what that has done is created a devaluing of the unchurched or people who aren't part of this community, in the sense that we often are teaching that you have to look a certain way, you have to act a certain way, and that is what brings you value in a sense. And I think this has led to obviously a lot of people in the church and church leaders just acting morally to avoid punishment. And then what happens? Like, what happens when we teach our kids to just avoid punishment? They just hide their behaviors, right? And so there has to be something else there. I think that if we focused more on teaching morality based on compassion for others instead of shame and avoidance of punishment, then we'd probably have a lot less or fewer kind of the asshole Christians, that, well, I can say this and it doesn't matter, or I can do this as long as you don't find out about it, right? But getting back to kind of the idea in the original blessing of God, God being in all things and through all things, we see a deep value and a worthiness in creation, not just in people who share all of our same values or think like we do, but as kind of a default state of the human being as having just immense value and worthiness. And I think that's kind of the answer to the you are not good. Another message, a shame message, is you're not good enough. And so this is kind of focusing on that performance. You're almost there, you've almost got it, you got all, B's on your report card, but I think there's really an A student in there somewhere, deep down. So it's like you've almost measured up, but you're not quite there. And a lot of times parents feel justified in approaching parenting in this way, because you might get the results. You might get the outcome of a high achiever. Sure, they're crippled with anxiety, but they're achieving at a high level, right? Because they're pushing themselves constantly to try to reach some standard. And the problem, though, with this is that, the message is that all value being held in high regard or being loved is conditional. It's based on some set of standards that you have to reach, and even if caregivers maybe not making it that explicit or saying like, I only love you if you get all A's or something. It's this idea that this is how I gain, favor or regard or value, is through my achievements, through the outcomes here. And we'll kind of address that in a minute, but I want to go through the next three pretty quickly. They're all pretty easily, are obviously negative. So number 3 would be you don't belong. So this could be you're different, you don't fit in with our family, you're kind of the black sheep. I have noticed kind of an unexpected version of this sometimes crop up. I know this happened in our family. So if you've ever used the phrase, and I'm speaking to myself here because I use this phrase, in our family, we don't blank. So I used to use it. I did this once with Shiloh, and then I caught it and recognized, oh, this is shaming. So in our family, we don't hit, okay? So your darling angel just clocked somebody. So in her mind, or his mind, are they then not in the family? Like, obviously they realize they hit, so do they not belong anymore? And so that introduces this idea of shame. Like, this is a condition. In our family, we don't do this, so if you want to be in our family, if you want to belong, then, you're not matching that, right? You're not performing up to this level. And so, and I'll get into some different ways that I approach that later, but absolutely, we need to think about those types of things as parents, and even in our past as children. Like, how did we think about belonging? How did we think about fitting in with our family? Like, was it kind of held over us? Like, you have to do these things, you have to check these boxes to feel like you actually belong. Another message, so we've had you're not enough, you're not good, you don't belong. Another one is you're not lovable. This is maybe sometimes expressed as you're hard to love, or it's difficult to love you. Why do you make things so hard, and the idea, again, is that you need to do something more. You're not enough, you aren't doing enough of something to deserve love. And then the fifth one, this one is really devastating, and it's you should not exist. And this one, I see people who have heard this maybe directly in therapy, and sometimes it's been more indirect, like it was an accident or you were unexpected, and that can kind of leave those feelings of maybe I shouldn't be here, But I've also had people who were, directly told you shouldn't have been born, right? So obviously shame will come from that. I think it's impossible for there not to be a wound of shame there, if that has ever been expressed to you, or if you've understood that in some way. So all of these messages are seeing love as conditional, as having some sort of set of standards that are required to be met for you to be loved or highly regarded, highly valued. And so, like I said, a lot of times parents can justify this because maybe they're getting some good outcomes their kids are achieving. But it's kind of that whole, like, well, you turned out fine. Well, we're all in therapy, so there might be some things that could have been done a little bit differently. So what is the response to this? I think that we see that if our love, if our value is based on conditions or standards being met, that we're just not going to feel good enough. And what they found, in research is that this is a very persistent feeling, that even when you're achieving great things, that a person still feels this, I'm not good enough. So it actually is completely independent from your actual performance. That's kind of the messed up thing about this, right? Like, it doesn't matter how well you do, what you achieve, it's not going to ever get you to that point of feeling loved, because you are operating in this mindset that love and that value is still based on conditions. And whether those are standards of someone else or standards you put on yourself, it's even if you occasionally meet that standard, it's still not going to result in that feeling of love, being loved. So I said I wanted to talk about some things that are kind of hopeful that we can take from the community here at Collective, and so I want to transition to that, but I also want to say one more thing about shame and maybe why it's hard for us to let go of sometimes. So Stephen Colbert, I remember watching an interview, and he's a good Catholic, and so I think very well versed in shame. And he was talking to a guest once about shame. I think it might have been Brene Brown. I'd have to go back and look at it. But he was saying, well, maybe a smidge of shame is ideal. Like, maybe we need to keep a little bit of shame to keep us in check, right? Kind of as like a social rule that helps people, act appropriately around each other. And so the idea here is there a reason that shame is maybe good? Like maybe some amount of shame is okay or healthy for us to have in society. And because it is kind of a corrective at times, right? And I would say, that it actually isn't necessary, that shame is always toxic or negative. That's my position on it. As long as you have a robust enough definition of guilt. So and there's a difference there, and I'll explain it, but if you can distinguish shame from guilt and see the importance of guilt in our kind of growth and improvement as people in society or in relationship, then shame isn't necessary. So shame, it can be corrective, like I was saying, in helping us alter behavior. It can be highly motivating. I'm kind of over seeing all the health coaches on Facebook posting look how lazy and terrible I used to be. Like, look at these pictures, and now look how much I've grown. And so all this shaming about where maybe they've been. So in a sense, it can be highly motivating in the moment, but like I said, it's a hamster wheel, right? Like, you're not going to get off of that. You're not going to ever reach that place that you think, okay, when I finally reach this weight or this achievement, this accomplishment, then I can stop feeling that. You're always going to be seeing another mountain that you have to reach, another mountaintop before you feel like you'll feel like you're good enough. But shame is a little different than guilt, right? So remember, the definition of shame is that we're defective in some way, defective as a human being or a subhuman. Guilt is so there are two ways to think of guilt. So guilt can be like your status in relation to something else, and it can be a feeling. For example, some of you may be guilty of speeding on your way here to church today. But I would guess that most of you don't feel guilty for that, right? Maybe Chris Gibson would feel guilty. She talks about being speeding a lot, so maybe she feels guilty. So the guilt as a feeling is when you realize you've violated some value, that you hold, so you realize your actions don't align with a value that you have, and so you feel guilty about that. Now, it can also happen, or we can expect it to happen when someone else is violating a value that we hold. Like, we can wish that they would feel guilty about that. Maybe their status is guilty, they did violate that value, but we want them to change their behavior, so we want them to feel guilty about that. So I remember my youngest, Joy, she used to really enjoy sneaking gum. So she'd ask us if she could have one piece of gum, and then she would end up sneaking a lot more. And so one time I was walking past our refrigerator, and like the gap between the refrigerator and the wall, I think it was really like hundreds of gum wrappers, like, piles of gum wrappers in there. And so she was violating a rule. She was guilty of it, but she was not feeling guilty about it, right? And so I went and I talked to her about it, and I could have shamed in this position, right, as a parent, and a lot of parents would, like, you're a thief, this is bad, you're a liar, like, and I can't even imagine, if you know Joy, she's a little cutie, so like, I don't think I could have even done that, adorable little liar, but I didn't want to take that approach, of course, because of how damaging it can be to be shamed. So I talked to her about, hey, we have this rule in place because it'll hurt your tummy if you have too much of this, and we wouldn't want your tummy to hurt, and can you imagine, like, our dog, he would love to eat, ice cream all day, but wouldn't that hurt his tummy sometimes, so we have rules in place. And her eyes got really big, and she was like, you found the gum wrappers, So then she started to feel like some guilt about it, like, okay, I did something that could hurt my tummy, right? And I think that was the right approach. Still, sometimes I'll see like one lone gum wrapper hidden somewhere, like, and I always went, I don't know if it was from that era, and or if she's still doing this. But the goal here was to help her change the behavior, right? It wasn't to make her feel defective as a person for doing something against a value. When we're hoping that somebody else will change their behavior, we have that choice. We can try to help them understand why, a value is being held, and help them maybe take that value, adopt that value themselves, and then maybe they would, be motivated to change it. But we don't want to take the other approach, which is to shame and make them feel defective for having a different value than we have. So another version of this, when Shiloh was about 3, she was really interested in kind of identifying what the rules were. She's absolutely a rule follower. So she would say things like, we don't hit people, right? And that, that was the change from, we don't hit people in this family. It just became, we don't hit people because it hurts them, right? So the focus more on compassion and empathy for others instead of, belonging to the family. So it was funny though, because she started to get really specific with it too. Like, one time she was like, Dad, we don't hit baby sisters with a plastic dinosaur for tearing our paper, right? and to which I replied, honey, can I have the plastic dinosaur for a little while? And then it also got really weird. We joke about this still. At one time she said, "Dad, we don't lick mirrors in clothing stores, right?" Because of germs. Yes, that's true. We don't do that. Have we done that? Like, where are we at with this? So I was talking to Emily about this and about how I think we can clearly see, like, let's use, for example, the extreme, like the Westboro Baptist type of approach, shaming people for having different values than they have. And we can just obviously see how wrong-headed their approach is, how terrible that is, right? And destructive, absolutely. And I'm really cautious about how I say this next part because I don't want to say for you to think that I'm comparing anything we do with that type of destructive approach, but I think that we can also have the same sort of tendencies to shame for people not agreeing with our values, right? I think about when someone is being a Karen. I apologize to any Karens, and so they are videotaped in the store, acting really awful and harmful, and then that's posted on Facebook and everybody is deriding them. That's the same type of approach of shaming out of defectiveness, right? But it's so the idea here, though, is, and I want to be really careful with this because Emily was rightly saying, like, we need to be able to hold people accountable, right, for the wrong things that they do if they're causing harm. And I absolutely believe that. I think that's necessary. And so the way that we do this is not necessarily, I think the best way to do this is not to make them feel defective as a person for what they're doing wrong, but helping them understand the harm that they're causing. And we have every right to express that, and to make that, clear that they have harmed someone, and that's the part of holding them accountable. But I think if we're hoping that they'll feel defective for what they've done, that's the wrong approach. That's going to create more defensiveness. I think, one way that I've experienced this in my own life, Emily was talking to me about how she had learned, recently in a stamped book by Ibram Kendi, Kendi, about the difference between kind of a segregationist racism and assimilationist racism. And so segregationists, believe that kind of more of the conscious belief that we are superior in some way to another race, and so therefore should be separate. Assimilationist tends to be much less conscious, oftentimes, and more the belief that the more that another race acts like my race, then they're better, for that, or they kind of reach a higher status. And so the way that I've recognized this at times is, thinking, oh, how well someone maybe speaks proper English, as a sign of intelligence or something. So I think, I recognized in myself that I've been guilty of this at times. And instead of taking, the harmful kind of self-shaming approach to that, which would lead to, feeling defective and awful as a person, that I have a better chance of actually growing and healing if I can see that as, oh, I've caused harm with these types of, with this way of thinking, and I need to make changes to it. I need to make a difference. The feeling shame for like being a racist versus feeling guilty for violating this value, I think that's a major difference, right? I think that we can grow. We're more likely to be open to hearing, things that we need to change, and be less defensive if we're not approaching it from that place of shame, and we're seeing, okay, there's actually positive change that can happen, and so that is growing with compassion, right? That's having compassion for yourself in those situations where you've gotten something wrong, and being able to see potential for change and growth. So we heal from shame through compassion. The central, I think, values of collective church have been grace and peace, and I would include compassion as part of that with grace, and so this is a core value, and it's helped us grow, I think, immensely as people. But for a lot of people, compassion is a lot easier to feel for someone else than for yourself, right? And so oftentimes I'll ask people in therapy to imagine that their friend is feeling something similar to what they maybe have expressed to me, or has done something similar, and how would you feel about that person? Maybe what would you think about their situation? And very immediately, most people are able to think, well, I would try to understand them, and I would give them grace, and I would show them love and compassion. But we're so slow to do that for ourselves, and this is actually, it's a natural tendency to be more self-critical, because we think, I know all this stuff about myself, and so I need to hold myself to a higher standard, right? But I think the beauty of what we've gotten here at Collective is we've learned how to be compassionate. We've trained ourselves in that, acting that way with one another and showing that to one another, and that's powerful. But we can also feel that for ourselves, right? We can also apply that to our own story and our own situation. So the feeling like you don't deserve grace and peace, of course, that's the resurfacing of the not being good enough, right? That shame message. If you think, well, I can, feel this, grace for someone else, but I don't really deserve that. That's the shame talking again. And it's because, again, we are in this conditional mindset that love and value is based more on reaching some sort of standard or goal, rather than it's just inherent in who you are as a creation of God and as God abiding in you. So what are some things that the Bible says about this? I know you're wondering, we're just talking about Bible verses this far into that. So I'll be quick through these. But the first one is in 1 John 4:16 through 21, and I'm reading out of the New Revised Standard Version. So we have known and believe that the love that God has for us. God is love, and those who abide in love abide in God, and God abides in them. Love has been perfected among us in this, that we have boldness on the day of judgment, because as He is, so are we in this world. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear, for fear has to do with punishment, and whoever fears has not reached perfection in love. We love because He first loved us. Those who say, I love God, and hate their brothers or sisters are liars. For those who do not love a brother or sister whom they have seen cannot love God whom they have not seen. The commandment we have from him is this: those who love God must love their brothers and sisters also. So notice the emphasis is not on punishment and fear, but on abiding love as we abide in God. So awareness of being completely enveloped in love, it actually obliterates the fear of punishment. So if my child is completely convinced of her status of being loved and being worthy of love, being highly valued, then she's free to make mistakes. She's free to get it wrong. It's okay. She has freedom to not be perfect, right? Because she doesn't connect that. She isn't saying, or she isn't believing that she has to hit this standard to be worthy, to be valued. In John 13:34 and 35, it says, I give a new commandment, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also should love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. So what a concept, that Christians would be known by love, right? By sharing that love with one another, showing that compassion. That's what we've done here at Collective, we have, if nothing else, been known for loving too much, right? Loving too boldly, too many. In Mark 12:28 through 34, it says, one of the scribes came near and heard them disputing with one another, and seeing that he answered them well, he asked him, which commandment is the first of all? Jesus answered, the first is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is this: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these. Then the scribe said to him, You are right, teacher. You have truly said that he is one, and besides him there is no other. And to love him with all your heart, with all the understanding, with all the strength, and to love one's neighbor as oneself. This is much more important than all whole burnt offerings and sacrifices. And when Jesus saw that he answered wisely, he said to him, You are not far from the kingdom of God. That's, I think, the vision that Rob and Caroline always had, was bringing the kingdom here, loving one another, showing this compassion, this grace and peace. I've often used this verse talking about loving your neighbor as yourself. Loving yourself is understood in that. It's not going to be very helpful, if you're not loving yourself, to say, do this same thing that you do for yourself for others. I think it's harder for us. Maybe, I don't know if there's a difference there, culturally, but it's harder for us to do that first part of loving yourself. The last verse here is in Colossians 3:12 through 14. As God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, clothe yourself with compassion, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience. Bear with one another, and if anyone has a complaint against another, forgive each other, just as the Lord has forgiven you, so you also must forgive. Above all, clothe yourself with love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony. So I always read this as clothe yourself with compassion for other people. Like, put this on like the armor of God and then go out and be compassionate. But I think another interpretation of this would be put that on yourself. Wear that compassion, that same love that binds all things together in harmony. You feel that for yourself. So clothe yourself in compassion. Above all, clothe yourselves in love. So I want you to take from this place the love that you've felt toward others, the grace and peace that you've shared every week and with other church members. I want you to wear that like a warm blanket for yourself. Bask in that love and compassion that is maybe easier for you to feel for others, and feel that for yourself. This is what I think it means to take away something great from our time here at Collective. I want you to believe that every good thing, every thought, every word that you've spoken to someone else to encourage them, that's also for you, that you deserve that. This is the answer to shame. You are enough, right? Belonging, as Brene Brown, it would be hard for me to get through a whole message without talking about her, right? She argues that it's the courage to ultimately belong to yourself, and to be accepting of yourself in that. And oftentimes we find that if we find a community like Collective, then we learn through those examples of belonging to them how to belong to ourselves. But that's the next step, right? Because you take that with you. It doesn't matter who maybe challenges that or tries to shame you. Once you have understood that I belong, I'm accepted, I accept who I am, then nobody can take that away from you again. So I want to stay connected. I love that we, have a group online that we can still talk in. I think it's important for us to do that, to, maintain a community in the sense of we can still encourage one another. But you can also take this with you as far as feeling that compassion for yourself that you felt for others here. So grace and peace to all of you at Collective, and I've really enjoyed my time with you today. Yeah. Were there any questions or comments or rebuttals? Or